It was supposedly a tough week for Barack Obama, but someone forgot to tell the American people.
Times have changed, but not when it comes to openness to electing a Mormon for president.
And union members tilt to Obama, but by no means monolithically. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup editor-in-chief.
I'm Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today.
And this is Election Matters. Well, Susan, the conventional wisdom is that it was a tough week for Obama. How many different places did we see that over this last week, right? List for us the things that went bad for Obama, supposedly.
Well, this month has been a tough month. First, we had those disappointing jobs numbers come out at the beginning of June. We had the president's gaffe on Friday when he said the private sector was doing fine. And we had the vote in Wisconsin when that Republican governor survived a recall attempt.
And I believe there was some financial news that Romney had raised as much or more money than Obama. Is that right?
That's right.
They kind of add to it. So
Romney had raised $76 million compared to $60 million for the president's effort. And you know, $60 million sounds like a lot of money until you compare it to $76 million.
Absolutely. So there's this wave theory of journalism or punditry or conventional wisdom that I subscribe to, which is everybody kind of moves in a wave, right? So clearly the wave, the conventional wisdom last week was that it was a tough week for Obama. Everybody talked about it. It was on the Sunday talk shows and all that. I said people forgot to tell the American people because we can't, Susan, find evidence of it in our tracking data. Let's take Obama's job approval rating.
What is it?
50%. Now that's 3 days.
How long has it been since he was that high?
That was since the beginning of May.
Wow.
And now those 3 days are through Sunday, so that would be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now these things will go up and down, so maybe it'll go back down this week, but the fact that he actually moved up through the week, it bounced around but got to 50%, certainly does not suggest that he's hemorrhaging or suffering badly, at least on that one measure, does it? He's as high, as you say, as he's been since the 1st of May.
That's right, and in fact he's up to that magic number of 50, which is very good news for a president seeking re-election. Will you take another measure, which is the ballot test, Obama versus Romney? How has that fared?
Well, they're statistically tied. We do a longer rolling average there, and it's a 7-day rolling average, and they're where they've always been. Romney's up by 1 right now, right around the 46 mark. But if we just look independently at the night-by-night numbers, which do have a lot of variability, which is why we roll it, for the last 3 nights, Obama has been up above Romney there as well. So we'll see how that plays out. But that looks, even if you just look at it that Romney's up 1, that certainly doesn't suggest, based on our history, any hemorrhaging there either. It's not like Romney zoomed to a 10-point lead.
So it's clear the American people are not listening to the pundits who are telling them what they think.
That's right. Now, all this news is big news to us who follow it, but maybe the average American out there didn't pay as much attention or heard about it but dismissed it. We don't know.
Or maybe attitudes are just so set that it's really hard to change them. Maybe this is one of those years when people have already largely made up their minds.
Absolutely, and that's why we've seen the rough tie in the ballot ever since we've started tracking. It'll go up and it'll go down, but when we aggregate over 3-week periods, it just comes back to so far it's tied. And we didn't see this as a moment where all of a sudden there was one of these shifting points in the race and Romney moved ahead. We just don't see it at all in the data. So that's why we have the data, right?
Now, one more piece of news coming out for the president this month will be the Supreme Court's decision on his health care plan.
And what are they going to rule?
Well, we think they might rule next week, next Monday.
Oh, what? Don't you
what
have
will they going to
sources?
rule? Well, that's a harder question.
Yeah, that's right.
Look, they're going to uphold it, they're going to knock it down, or they're going to knock down part of it and leave part of it standing. That's what I predict.
Now, the implications for Obama are what we're interested in here in an election context. I just reviewed a lot of recent polls on do you like or not like the act, and all of them are negative. I haven't seen any in recent months that are positive, and some of them are like 8 or 10-point spreads, negative over positive on the Affordable Health Care Act. So we know it's a fairly tilting as an unpopular act, even after all this time. It was passed early in 2010. So what does that mean? If it's struck down, could that perversely work to Obama's betterment as far as the election is concerned?
You know, I think it's hard to know exactly how the Supreme Court decision is going to play. I do know that you can tell the White House does not want to talk about the health care law, even though it's his signature achievement of his first term. I think many people would agree with that, because the president no longer talks about it much on this stuff. The degree to which it is that there's an advocate for it, that's the Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius, who talks about it, tries to make the case that some of the provisions are really very helpful to people, like letting kids stay on their parents' health care.
And by the way, on that, our Gallup data show that's working. We've seen and published the results, not a dramatic, but I'd say semi-dramatic drop-off of a few points in the percent of young people who are uninsured, and that's a direct result of the Health Care Act. So it's having some impact.
But the idea that the administration pushed early on, that once people knew about the law, got comfortable with it, some of the early provisions took effect, they'd be persuaded, that has clearly not turned out to be true.
Yeah, we were pondering, are there questions we can ask ahead of time about it? But really, we're going to have to wait and see what comes down and then ask some polling questions. So I guess the answer to our question is, we don't know. Whatever comes down, what impact it's going to have, that's what we're going to wait and see.
I think that's right.
You mentioned the Mormon issue.
You know, this is interesting. You know, we've seen in the past couple decades such increasing openness to electing an African-American president. In fact, we did that. Or to electing a woman as president. But when we look at the question of whether you would vote for a Mormon who is otherwise qualified to be president, we find that there hasn't been a change in public attitude. 17% said no in 1967. That's when Mitt Romney's father was running for president, seeking the Republican nomination. Now 18% say they are not open to voting.
There was a little difference in the don't knows, higher don't knows back then. So the percentage who said they would was a little lower. It's 80% now. But basically, you're right, no change in that measure. Now, we always point out that I think well over 20% of Americans said they wouldn't vote for a Catholic for president in 1960. And John Kennedy got elected.
Yes.
So this is not like that Romney can't get elected. But you're absolutely right. That's been one of the most stable measures that we have along these lines.
And contrast that with openness to electing a gay man or a lesbian as president. In 1978, only 26% of Americans said they would be willing to do that. Now 68% say they're open to that idea.
Yeah, lots of change. And you mentioned a man in the black. That has gone way, way up from where it was. This simply hasn't changed. Now, one last point on union members. Wisconsin, Scott Walker survived the recall. In fact, he won by 7 points. Reminds us of unions. But you know what we found? We just did a big analysis, and I wrote it up. When we look at all of our tracking data, union members tilt to Obama, but not monolithically. We've got over a third of union members nationally who say they'll vote for Mitt Romney. So the union support's there, but it's not like, for example, the 90% of blacks will vote for Obama or things along those lines.
But contrast that to where union money goes, because union money, the political spending by labor unions is overwhelmingly on the Democratic side.
So rank and file, not monolithic, but you're saying leadership and support of the money, clearly. Well, we'll wait and see how that plays out, but that's one of the strong groups money-wise, along with what, entertainers? Entertainers,
and in fact, human rights activists, especially on behalf of gay and lesbian
causes. In Silicon Valley, right?
And Silicon Valley have all been big contributors this year.
Good. Now, Susan, we're going to watch for it. You've interviewed a lot of fascinating people, so we're going to be watching USA Today. We won't tell people exactly who you've interviewed, but let's watch it the next week or two. You're going to have some interesting interviews, aren't you?
Yeah. His initials are Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida. Interviewed him, and we'll have a story out on Monday.
And we've got some new data saying what percent of Americans.
That's right.
What they think about him. He's a possible Veep.
He is definitely on that list.
That's great. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.
And I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today.
This is Election Matters.